I woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. Coffee in hand, I stared out the window at the empty space where my woodpile used to be. It looked naked, like someone had stolen not just my firewood, but my peace of mind. Karen's house was directly across the lake, and even from here, I could see the thin trail of smoke curling into the cold air. I swear, that woman had the kind of nerve that could power a city. I spent the day quietly taking stock. I counted the logs left, noted the tire tracks again, and even found a few strands of gold tinsel caught on the rough bark. Karen's decorations, she must have brushed against them while hauling it off. She wasn't even careful. That was the insult that stung the most. She didn't see me as a threat, just another pushover neighbor. But she didn't know me, not really. Back in my garage, I pulled out an old crate of tools from my days as a hobby machinist. I had cameras, motion sensors, even a couple of spare microchips from an unfinished drone project. It wasn't high-end espionage gear, but it would do. That evening, I sat at my workbench, carving, drilling, and hollowing out logs. Each one looked perfectly solid from the outside. Inside, though, was a nest of tiny electronics, a motion-triggered camera, a small GPS chip, and a miniature LED that blinked once when it went live. It was beautiful in a mischievous kind of way. I even added a layer of invisible UV powder around the bark. It was an old trick I'd learned in a workshop once. Under normal light, it looked perfectly natural, but under a blacklight, it glowed bright blue. If Karen wanted to keep stealing, she'd be glowing like a Christmas tree soon enough. Around 10 p.m., I stacked the new firewood just like before, neat and inviting. The camera I set up on my porch had a wide view of the yard and the woodpile perfectly framed. Then I turned off the lights, brewed another coffee, and waited. It's funny how quiet the world gets when you're waiting for something to happen. The lake froze solid, the wind stopped, and the only sound was the faint creak of the trees outside. I sat by the window watching shadows move across the snow, half expecting nothing at all. But then headlights. Small ones low to the ground. My heart kicked up a notch, the kind of thrill that comes just before a prank turns serious. I leaned forward, careful not to move too fast, and sure enough, there it was. The faint outline of a golf cart crawling down the road. I could make out her shape, bundled in a puffy jacket and wearing earmuffs, creeping up to my yard like she was in some kind of low-budget spy movie. She didn't even bother to check if anyone was watching. Karen got out, looked around once, then grabbed one of the hollow logs. Another, then another. She stacked them on her cart, humming to herself like she was proud of her midnight work. The camera blinked quietly from inside the log, recording everything. By the time she drove off, I was grinning so wide my face hurt. It wasn't just about the wood anymore. It was about justice, poetic and glowing. When she was gone, I stepped outside. The air was freezing, but the satisfaction was warm enough to keep me standing there for a minute, smiling at the tracks her tires left behind. Inside, I checked the footage. Perfect. Crystal clear, like something out of a documentary called Wild Karens of the Suburbs. The timestamp showed everything. The time, her face, the theft, the exact number of logs she took. But I wasn't going to post it. Not yet. The real show was coming soon. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the whole HOA to see it unfold, not in some petty online feud, but in person. In the daylight. In front of everyone she'd ever bossed around. And as luck, or irony, would have it, the HOA had a community bonfire scheduled that weekend. Guess who was hosting? Karen. I could almost hear her voice rehearsing her smug introduction. Welcome, neighbors. Thanks to everyone's contributions, we have a wonderful fire tonight. Oh, she had no idea. For the next 2 days, I stayed calm, almost cheerful. I waved when I saw her driving by. She waved back, blissfully unaware that her hands still had faint traces of my UV powder. I even stacked a few more decoy logs, just in case she wanted seconds. When Saturday came, the air was crisp and the lake was glassy. Everyone gathered around Karen's fancy new stone fire pit. She looked radiant, basking in her stolen glory, handing out cocoa and pretending she was some kind of queen of warmth. I waited until the flames got high and everyone was relaxed. Then, slowly, I pulled a small UV flashlight from my jacket pocket. Nobody noticed at first when I clicked it on, but when I shined it toward her gloves, oh, the gasp that rippled through the crowd. Her hands glowed bright blue. Her jacket, too. Even the side of her precious golf cart sparkled like something radioactive. For a few seconds, the silence was perfect. Then came the laughter. Karen froze, blinking in disbelief. "What is this?" she yelled, waving her glowing hands. I shrugged, smiling just enough to sting. "Looks like community spirit, Karen. You've really got it all over you." Her face went red. She sputtered something about sabotage, but by then, half the neighbors were filming. That was the night Karen learned something about me, something she should have figured out sooner. I don't start fights, but I always finish them. And as I watched her glow in front of her own fire, I couldn't help but think, this winter was going to be the warmest one yet. You'd think getting caught red-handed, literally glowing blue under a UV light, would make someone apologize, right? Not Karen. No, Karen was built different. The woman could twist reality like a magician. By the time the laughter died down that night, she was already in damage control mode. She snatched off her gloves, stuffed them in her coat pocket, and declared, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is harassment. He's trying to humiliate me." The neighbors went quiet. Some looked at me, some at her, and a few at their phones, already uploading clips to Facebook. I didn't say a word. I just folded my arms and stared at her, letting the silence do the talking. She pointed at me with that trembling, manicured finger. "This is a violation of HOA protocol. Using chemicals on shared property is strictly prohibited." I raised an eyebrow. "Shared property? You mean my stolen firewood?" She blinked. You could practically see the gears grinding behind her eyes, trying to find an escape route. Then she straightened her posture and smiled that same tight, artificial smile. "It's not theft if it's for the benefit of the community." I swear, I almost laughed out loud. The mental gymnastics she did could have qualified her for the Olympics. Before I could respond, she turned to the crowd. "Everyone, please disregard this nonsense. We all contribute to the HOA bonfire fund, don't we?" Nobody answered. Not a single soul. Even her usual group of loyal followers avoided eye contact. That's when I knew I had her cornered, and she knew it too. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope taped to my front door. It was an official HOA notice, printed on that fancy, embossed stationery Karen loved so much. I didn't even have to open it to guess what it said. Notice of violation, unauthorized use of substances on shared grounds. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The audacity of that woman. She'd been caught stealing, exposed in front of the whole neighborhood, and her next move was to find me. I walked outside, the cold biting at my fingers, and sure enough, there she was across the street, pretending to inspect someone's mailbox. She looked up, saw me holding the letter, and gave a little wave like nothing had happened. "Morning," she called cheerfully. I waved back, smiling. "Morning, thief." She froze for just a second before forcing another grin. Then she marched back to her house like she had more laws to invent. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let her gaslight me, or anyone else again. I made copies of the footage, time-stamped and clear. Then I slipped one into the mailbox of every single HOA board member. I didn't say a word to anyone, just let the evidence speak for itself. By the end of the day, I'd gotten 3 texts and 1 phone call. The treasurer, an older guy named Bob, said, "I always knew she was up to something, but this is gold." That night, the HOA called an emergency meeting. We met in the clubhouse, a small wooden building that smelled like coffee, old paperwork, and stress. Karen sat at the front table, arms crossed, lips pursed like a cat that just smelled vinegar. She opened the meeting like she always did, formally. This session is called to order to discuss false allegations and misuse of surveillance equipment within the community. I almost applauded. She was still trying to spin it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, set my laptop on the table, and pressed play. There it was, high-definition footage of Karen sneaking through my yard, loading my firewood, humming while she worked. The room went dead silent except for the faint clinking of her bracelets as her arms slowly dropped to her lap. When the clip ended, I didn't say a thing. I just turned to her and said, "Community contribution, right?" Bob let out a wheezy chuckle. Someone else muttered, "Guess the wood was free range." Karen's face went bright red. "This is illegal. He can't record private citizens." The vice president of the HOA, a woman named Judy, cleared her throat. "Actually, Karen, the cameras were on his property. Perfectly legal." Karen shot her a glare that could melt ice. "You're all turning against me because I care about this community." "No," I said calmly. "We're turning against you because you keep stealing from it." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the treasurer leaned forward and said, "Motion to suspend Karen from the HOA board pending review." It passed unanimously. Karen stood up, slammed her folder shut, and stormed out. The door banged behind her so hard it rattled the blinds. I stayed seated, still calm, still sipping from my thermos. Because the truth was, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. When I got home, the street was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you feel like the storm hadn't passed, it was just circling back. Sure enough, 2 days later, another letter appeared in my mailbox. Only this time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from Karen's lawyer. She was suing me for defamation and psychological distress. I laughed, but my gut twisted. This woman wasn't done yet. She was doubling down, dragging me into her chaos, trying to bury me under paperwork instead of rules. But she didn't realize something. This wasn't my first fight. And she was about to find out that I play better on defense than she ever did on offense. Karen's letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 straight days. Thick envelope, fancy law firm logo, and just enough legal jargon to make any normal person sweat. I didn't. I just kept reading it over coffee every morning, the way some people read the newspaper. She wanted damages for emotional distress. She claimed I'd maliciously entrapped her with altered property. In plain English, she'd stolen my wood, got caught, and now wanted to get paid for it. I'll admit, part of me was impressed. That level of nerve should come with its own postal code. Still, I wasn't about to let her win through paperwork. I had 2 options, fight her in court or finish what I started. I chose both. The idea hit me one evening as I sat by the dwindling remains of my fireplace. I'd already recorded her once. But what if she tried it again? What if she came back, this time to destroy the evidence or plant something on my property to make me look guilty? I needed insurance. I went back to my garage and stared at the leftover logs from my first experiment. There were 6 still hollowed out, lined with wiring and powder. But this time, I wasn't just setting bait. I was building a stage. Each log got an upgrade. Small transmitters linked to my laptop, motion sensors with live alerts, and a discreet camera disguised in a knot of wood. I sealed them carefully and stacked them right where she could see them, perfectly visible from the road, like I was taunting her. To anyone else, it looked like I'd learned nothing. To Karen, it looked like an opportunity. Sure enough, the next night around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I pulled up the live feed, and there she was again. Same pink puffer jacket, same golf cart, but this time she looked nervous. She scanned the street, took out her phone and snapped a few pictures of my shed, maybe to use later in her case. Then she did what she always did best, ignored common sense. She started loading the logs again. I whispered at the screen, "Go on, take the bait." She drove off and I sat back, smiling. This time the transmitters were active. I could track her every move. The dots on the laptop screen moved straight to her house. The next morning, I walked over casually, pretending to be out for a stroll. She was outside, sweeping her driveway like she hadn't just committed another felony. "Morning, Karen," I said cheerfully. She didn't look up. "I've been advised not to speak to you." "Sure," I said, "but your golf cart's GPS is still transmitting from my Firewood. Might want to turn that off." Her broom froze mid-sweep. She turned slowly. "What did you just say?" "Nothing," I smiled, "just talking to myself." That night, I sent the footage to the HOA board again. No commentary, no jokes. Just the time-stamped video. Then I called the sheriff's office and filed an official theft report. 2 days later, I heard the sirens. The deputies didn't cuff her, they just knocked on her door, calm and polite. But the whole neighborhood saw. They asked her to step outside, asked a few questions, and then walked back to their cruiser with one of my hollow logs in hand, camera still blinking red. I was standing on my porch when one of them looked my way and gave a slight nod. That nod said it all. Karen didn't speak to me for the rest of the week, but I saw her blinds twitch every time I went outside. She knew I had her cornered, yet she couldn't help herself. The following Saturday, the HOA held another emergency meeting, this time without her. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president pending the investigation. The treasurer leaned over to me afterward and whispered, "You know, you could run for her spot." I laughed. "No thanks, I prefer my hobbies legal and flammable." By Sunday, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. Kids played in the street again, neighbors waved without fear of citations, and someone even hung Christmas lights that didn't match the HOA color palette. It was like the spell had been broken. But peace doesn't last long in my world. That night, while I was finishing dinner, I heard a loud pop from across the lake, followed by shouting. I stepped outside and saw smoke rising from Karen's backyard. The glow was orange, too big for a normal fire pit. I called it in before anyone got hurt. The volunteer fire department arrived in minutes. Turns out, she'd been burning one of my hollow logs again, forgot there was wiring inside. The thing sparked like a Roman candle, scorched half her patio umbrella. Nobody was hurt, but her ego took a beating. The next morning, she packed her car. 2 boxes, 1 suitcase, and that same pink jacket. She didn't look at anyone, didn't wave. She just drove off, leaving the neighborhood silent except for the crunch of her tires on the gravel. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I just stood there with my coffee, watching the taillights disappear down the road. Sometimes revenge feels good. Other times, it just feels quiet. Still, I couldn't help smiling when Bob walked over later that afternoon and said, "Guess the queen finally abdicated." I shrugged, "Guess so." I thought it was the end of it. But 2 weeks later, as the snow melted and the air turned soft again, there came a knock on my door, 3 sharp taps that made my stomach drop. When I opened it, she was standing there. A Karen. Hair messy, eyes tired, holding something small in her hands. And before she even spoke, I knew this story wasn't over. When I opened that door, I half expected another threat, a lawsuit, maybe even a police officer waiting behind her. But there she was, Karen, stripped of her polished arrogance. Her hair was uncombed, her lipstick gone, her jacket wrinkled like she'd slept in her car. She held something small and wooden in her trembling hands, a piece of one of my hollow logs. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer at first. My mind raced. This could be a setup. Maybe she had a recorder in her pocket, maybe she wanted me to say something that could twist the case around. Still, curiosity won over caution. "Yeah," I said finally, "come in." She stepped inside slowly, like she was entering a church instead of my living room. I noticed her shoes left faint streaks of mud on the floor. She glanced around, eyes darting to the walls, the fireplace, then the small pile of firewood stacked near the hearth. "This used to be my favorite place in the neighborhood," she said softly. "Used to be." She nodded, setting the wooden fragment on the table. "You know what's funny? When I first moved here, I loved the sound of chopping wood. Reminded me of my dad. He used to build fires in the winter, made the whole house smell like cedar. When I started running the HOA, I thought I was protecting that kind of peace." I crossed my arms, not sure if I was hearing a confession or a performance. "Stealing firewood doesn't really scream peace, Karen." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "You're right. I wasn't stealing because I needed it. I was stealing because I couldn't stand that someone else ignored the rules and got away with it. The HOA made me feel powerful, important. I didn't realize how much I was losing until everyone stopped talking to me." There was a strange sincerity in her voice, something I hadn't heard before. For a long time, she'd been the villain of every neighbor's story. Now she looked like someone who'd finally run out of energy to pretend. She sighed and looked at the piece of wood again. "When that log caught fire, it scared me. I thought maybe it was some kind of punishment. Then I saw the wires inside, and I realized how far both of us had gone. I came to give this back." I stared at the burnt fragment. It was blackened, cracked, but still solid. "You almost burned your house down, Karen." She met my eyes. "I know, that's why I'm leaving." I blinked, leaving the neighborhood. Leaving everything. I sold my property to the bank. I'll probably move in with my sister for a while. She's in Montana, has a cabin, ironically. She gave a weak chuckle, then turned serious again. "Before I go, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." For a second, the only sound was the wind moving through the chimney. Karen Harding, queen of the HOA, destroyer of holidays, master of fines, was apologizing. I didn't know what to do with that. I rubbed the back of my neck. "You know, I built those hollow logs to scare you off, not hurt you." She nodded. "Well, it worked, scared the arrogance right out of me." We stood there for a moment in an awkward silence. She looked smaller somehow, like the power she used to carry had evaporated into the air. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and said, "You can tell the board I resigned. And maybe tell them not to vote for another Karen next time." That got a genuine laugh out of me. "I'll make sure of it." She smiled faintly. "Goodbye, Mark." And just like that, she turned and walked out. No yelling, no insults, no threats. Just quiet steps down my porch and into her car. The engine started and she drove away. No golf cart this time, no entourage. I thought that was the end of it. Until 2 weeks later, when a letter arrived. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was handwritten, addressed in neat cursive, to the man who taught me a lesson without even knowing it. Inside was a short note. "I found peace in Montana. The trees here are endless, and the fires don't need permission to burn. Sometimes we hold on to control because we're afraid of being forgotten. You showed me that losing control isn't the same as losing respect. Thank you, Karen." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before setting it down beside my coffee mug. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or guilty. Maybe both. That night I built a fire, not out of hollow logs or bait, just real wood, honest and solid. The flames flickered like memories, swallowing the past in quiet orange light. As I sat there, I thought about how people break differently. Some shatter loud, others just crack quietly over time. Karen had been both. And though she'd finally left the neighborhood, her story had burned itself into mine, like a scar that doesn't hurt but never fades. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, deep in those Montana woods, she was building fires again, only this time not from someone else's logs. 2 weeks passed after Karen's letter arrived, And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt normal. No citations taped to mailboxes, no tense HOA meetings in the clubhouse, no Karen packing around with her clipboard of doom. Neighbors actually waved at each other again. Kids rode bikes without helmets labeled HOA approved. Even the mailman stopped looking like he was about to cry. But peace in this neighborhood never lasted long. It was a Tuesday morning when Mike, my next-door neighbor and former HOA treasurer, knocked on my door. He looked pale, like he'd seen a ghost. "Mark, you got a minute?" "Sure," I said, motioning him inside. "What's going on?" He closed the door behind him, lowered his voice, and whispered, "They found something." "Who?" "The new interim board. They were cleaning out Karen's old office at the clubhouse, found a box of financial records in the attic. You're gonna want to see this." Now, I wasn't exactly the kind of guy who got excited about HOA paperwork, but the way Mike said it made me grab my jacket before asking any more questions. The clubhouse smelled like dust and cheap carpet cleaner when we got there. A few board members were gathered around a folding table. In the center sat a thick leather-bound ledger, yellowed at the edges, tied shut with twine. One of the board members, a woman named Janet, looked up. "You were closest to her, Mark. You should open it." Closest was a stretch, but curiosity got the better of me. I untied the twine and flipped open the cover. The first few pages looked ordinary: columns of dues, maintenance expenses, repair costs. Then the handwriting shifted. Karen's perfect cursive turned sharper, rushed. And the entries changed. Emergency allocation, $12,000. Private contractor confidential. Property easement, Lot 14, undisclosed owner. Legal counsel, retainer personal. I frowned. Lot 14, isn't that the empty property near the lake? Mike nodded. Yeah, supposed to be common land, no one owns it. But apparently, someone did. As we turned the pages, we found more confidential transactions, landscaping invoices for non-existent projects, community improvement payments to shell companies, even personal purchases, spa visits, travel receipts, and firewood reimbursement. I froze. Firewood reimbursement, $1,200. Janet leaned over. She was billing the HOA for the wood she was stealing. I let out a disbelieving laugh. You've got to be kidding me. But the joke didn't end there. The last few pages contain notes, personal ones, written like diary entries. They don't understand. If I don't keep order, this place will rot. They laugh at me, but they'll thank me when it's perfect. The ledger keeps them safe, even if they hate me for it. The room fell silent. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected: sympathy. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was drowning in the illusion that she had to control everything. Somewhere along the line, she'd convinced herself that rules were the only thing holding the neighborhood together. Then Mike found something tucked in the back cover, a sealed envelope with my name written on it. I blinked. Me. He handed it over. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page of paper, folded neatly. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable. Marked. If you're reading this, they've probably found the ledger. I didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. The firewood, that was personal. My dad used to say that when people stop sharing warmth, communities die. I think I just wanted to feel like I still mattered. The lake property, Lot 14, it's not what they think. Check the deed, you'll understand. Take care of the neighborhood for me. Karen. I read it twice, then a third time, and finally looked up at Mike. She mentioned the deed for Lot 14. He frowned. What about it? I don't know, but we're going to find out. By the next morning, we were at the county record's office downtown, flipping through dusty files. The clerk, a young woman with glasses too big for her face, slid the document across the counter. The property deed for Lot 14 was dated 2 years ago. The listed owner. Not Karen Harding. It was the Harding Foundation for Community Development. Harding Foundation, Mike said. She started a foundation. I scanned the document. The foundation's stated purpose was to fund maintenance and repairs for retired or disabled homeowners within the Ridgewood community. For the first time in this whole saga, I didn't have words. Karen had secretly been using HOA funds, illegally, sure, but to create something that was actually supposed to help people. All that control, all that paranoia, maybe it wasn't greed after all, maybe it was guilt. I folded the deed carefully and slid it back to the clerk. As we walked out of the records office, Mike broke the silence. You think she really meant well? I looked at the sky, gray clouds rolling over like smoke from an old fire. I think she wanted to fix everything, even if it meant breaking herself to do it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because if Karen had built a secret foundation, someone was still funding it. And someone, somewhere in this neighborhood, was keeping her mission alive. After finding that deed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's story wasn't finished. She might have left Ridgewood, but her fingerprints were still all over it, buried in ledgers, hidden in foundations, woven through the people she left behind. For a few days, I tried to ignore it. I stacked wood, mowed the lawn, even joined a community barbecue like nothing happened. But every time I looked toward the lake, I could almost feel her watching, like a ghost checking if I'd kept the rules straight. Then one morning, while I was drinking coffee, I saw a black SUV park outside the old HOA office. A woman stepped out tall, in a beige coat and sunglasses. She wasn't one of our board members. She carried a folder and a confident air that screamed government or corporate. Something about it felt wrong. So I waited. An hour later, she left. I walked down there pretending to check my mail. The office door was still slightly ajar. Inside, the same ledger I'd helped examine was gone. All that remained on the desk was a business card. Harding Foundation for Community Development, Regional Director, Melissa Grant. I flipped the card over. On the back in faint ink was a number, a local number. I called it that evening. Harding Foundation, this is Melissa. Hi, I said, trying to sound casual. This is Mark, from Ridgewood. I think you might have taken something that belongs to our HOA. There was a pause. Mr. Carter, she said, using my last name like she'd been expecting the call. Karen mentioned you might reach out one day. My heart jumped. You knew her. Yes, she said calmly. I helped her set up the foundation before she left. I'm the acting director now. I gripped the phone tighter. So you know about the ledger, the shell payments, the property. Everything, she replied. Karen wasn't trying to steal. She was diverting funds to keep the foundation running while the board delayed approvals. The board didn't want to admit it, but Ridgewood was heading toward bankruptcy. She used creative accounting to keep things afloat. I laughed in disbelief. Creative accounting, that's a fancy way of saying fraud. Call it what you want, she said, her tone steady. But without her, half your neighborhood would have gone into foreclosure. And you, Mr. Carter, you're benefiting from it too. She used foundation money to pay for those new drainage pipes under your property last winter. That stopped me cold. That's impossible. I paid for that myself. Check your invoice again, she said softly. The payment was rerouted through the Ridgewood Community Fund. That was us. The line went quiet except for my breathing. My mind raced back to the contractor's bill, the one that arrived marked paid in full. I'd assumed it was a clerical error. You're telling me Karen paid for that? I asked. Yes, Melissa said. Because you kept the firewood stacked for the entire block one winter when no one else would. She said you were the kind of neighbor worth protecting. My throat went dry. I didn't know whether to feel honored or manipulated. So why are you here now? I asked finally. To finish what she started, Melissa said. The foundation still owns Lot 14, and Karen wanted it developed into a lakeside retreat for retired residents. A place where neighbors could gather, share warmth, and stop fighting over fences. I almost smiled. That sounds too poetic for Karen. She changed more than you think, Melissa said. She asked me to give you something. I heard papers shuffle on the other end, then an envelope slid through my mail slot. I jumped. Melissa's SUV was gone. Inside the envelope was a single key, with a tag labeled Lot 14, Cabin. That night I drove down to the property by the lake. The moon hung low, casting silver ripples across the water. At the edge of the trees stood a small, unfinished cabin, bare wood walls, roof half done, chimney waiting to be built. And beside the front door, nailed to the frame, was a plaque. To those who shared warmth when I couldn't, KH. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt something shift in me. Karen hadn't just built a foundation. She built a legacy of redemption, and somehow she'd chosen me to finish it. As I stepped inside the half-built cabin, the smell of cedar filled the air. On the workbench lay blueprints, still rolled up, and a note written in familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, you finally understand. This place isn't mine, it's ours, keep it burning. The words hit me harder than I expected. I looked around the empty room, then out the window toward the lake, where her reflection might have once danced in the water. Somehow, I knew this wasn't just about Karen anymore. Someone else in this neighborhood had been funding her dream quietly, someone who still believed in her cause. And if I wanted to protect what she left behind, I needed to find out who that person was, before they decided to twist her legacy into something far darker. The night I found Karen's cabin, I couldn't sleep. The fire crackled in my own hearth, but my mind kept replaying everything Melissa said. A foundation built on forged numbers, a ledger filled with secrets, and now a key that opened a cabin no one knew existed. Something still didn't add up. Karen might have been controlling, but she wasn't stupid. She knew how to manage money. If she was diverting HOA funds, someone had to be helping her move it, someone with access to the accounts. And I had a pretty good idea who that might have been. The next morning, I knocked on Mike's door. He was half asleep, robe untied, coffee mug in hand. "Mark, you look like you saw a ghost." "Maybe I did," I said. "We need to talk about those old financial transfers, the ones marked maintenance subsidies. You were treasurer back then, right?" He hesitated just long enough to make my stomach twist. "Yeah, what about them?" "Karen couldn't move that kind of money without your signature. Don't tell me you didn't notice." Mike rubbed his temples, sighing. "Look, it wasn't what you think. She said it was for a community emergency fund. I signed off because I trusted her." I folded my arms. Trusted her or helped her? His eyes hardened. "You think I was in on it?" "I think somebody still is," I said. "The foundation, still running, and someone's paying for it." He looked away. "You should leave this alone, Mark. You've already done enough." That told me everything. I didn't push further then, but the next night I followed him. He thought he was clever, taking the long way down to the lake, headlights off, driving slow. But I'd lived here long enough to know every bend in those roads. His truck stopped near the cabin. He got out carrying a duffel bag and a flashlight. I parked back near the trees and crept closer through the brush, heart thudding. Inside, the cabin glowed with a dim light. Through the window, I saw him kneel by the old workbench, the same one where I'd found Karen's note. He opened the duffel and pulled out envelopes. Stacks of them, cash bundled tight. "What are you doing, Mike?" I whispered under my breath. He reached for a wooden box hidden under the bench, unlocked it, and started stacking the envelopes inside. When he stood up, he looked straight at the window. For a second, I thought he saw me. But instead, he whispered to the empty room, "I kept your promise, Karen. I'm still keeping it alive." Then he turned off the light and left. I waited until his truck disappeared down the road before stepping inside. The air was cold and smelled faintly of pine and smoke. I crouched near the box. It wasn't locked now, so I opened it. Inside were records, donation slips, receipts, letters, dozens of them. But what caught my attention wasn't the cash, it was a document with a government seal. Harding Foundation, Rural Development Partnership, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD, that was federal. I kept flipping until I found a letter addressed to Karen herself. We appreciate your cooperation in managing local community funds under the Ridgewood Pilot Project. All financial activity must remain discreet until the program's official launch. My stomach dropped. Karen wasn't stealing from the HOA, she was laundering federal funds through it. And Mike, he was keeping it alive. Suddenly, the creak of a floorboard behind me made me freeze. I told you to leave it alone. Mike's voice came from the doorway, low and tired. He held the flashlight like a weapon. Mike, I said slowly, raising my hands. What is this? You're working for the government now. He shook his head. No, I was protecting what's left of it. Karen made a deal with a HUD official to bring in money for Ridgewood. The HOA was supposed to use it for community projects, but when they backed out, she funneled it quietly. If anyone finds out, the whole neighborhood could lose federal funding. So you're just hiding money in a cabin. He sighed. Until the audit passes, yeah. Then the foundation becomes legal again. Karen wasn't trying to hurt anyone, Mark. She just didn't trust the system. I stepped closer. You think she'd want this? Lying, sneaking around, keeping secrets even after she's gone. His expression softened. You don't get it. She believed in this place, more than anyone. He looked past me at the half-finished chimney, his voice breaking slightly. She told me to keep it burning. That phrase again. Mike, I said carefully, whatever you think you're protecting, it's already burning. He stared at me for a long moment, then set the flashlight down. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time the truth comes out. When I left that night, I carried the box with me, records, cash, everything. By morning, the entire neighborhood would know what Karen had really been doing. But as I drove home, headlights cutting through the fog, one question wouldn't leave my mind. If Karen really had ties to a federal program, then who was the HUD official helping her? And why did it feel like someone was still watching the lake, waiting to see if I'd finally light the match? By sunrise, I had the box sitting on my kitchen table, stacks of cash, government letters, and Karen's old notes spread out like a puzzle I didn't want to solve anymore. The evidence was clear. She wasn't just bending HOA rules, she was playing a much bigger game. I could have called the cops. I could have buried it all and walked away. But I'd been dragged through too many sleepless nights, too many secrets buried under this neighborhood's perfect lawns. It was time to finish what she started and what she broke. At 8 a.m., I called the county office and asked for a meeting with the HUD liaison listed in the letter. The woman on the other end hesitated when I mentioned the Harding Foundation. Sir, could you hold, please? The line clicked. 30 minutes later, a black government sedan pulled up in front of my cabin. Two men stepped out, suits crisp, expressions unreadable. The kind of men who didn't knock, they expected doors to open. Mr. Carter, the older one asked. I'm Agent Phillips. This is Agent Moore. You have something that belongs to us. I gestured toward the table. If by belongs to you, you mean evidence of fraud and embezzlement, yeah, take a seat. Phillips gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've been busy. Karen Harding was the one who was busy, I said. I just found the matchbox she left behind. Moore flipped through the papers, scanning the HUD documents. Where did you find these? Cabin by the lake, I said. She called it Lot 14. Phillips exchanged a look with Moore. You know, we've been looking for that cabin for months. It wasn't supposed to exist. That made me pause. What do you mean? She went off book, Philip said. Karen was part of a federal pilot program, testing ways to move funds directly into underperforming communities without bureaucratic delay. She was supposed to keep records clean and transparent. I pointed at the piles of falsified invoices. That's your idea of transparent. Philip sighed. She got paranoid. When the board started questioning her spending, she panicked. Instead of coming clean, she covered her tracks, built her own network. She kept the foundation alive even after we cut her off. Moore closed the folder. Where is she now? She left town, Montana last I heard, I said. Sent me a letter, said she found peace. The agents looked at each other again, but this time, their silence felt heavier. What? I asked. Phillips exhaled slowly. Karen Harding died 3 weeks ago. Car accident outside Billings. Single vehicle crash. The report just came in yesterday. The room went still. The words didn't feel real. She's gone. I'm sorry, Moore said quietly. She was supposed to testify in a review hearing. She never made it. I sank into a chair. For all the chaos, all the shouting matches, all the Firewood wars, it suddenly didn't feel satisfying anymore. The storm I'd been fighting wasn't against a tyrant. It was against a woman who'd been losing control of her own crusade. Philip slid one of the documents toward me. You said she sent you a letter before she left. Did she mention anything about a key project? I nodded slowly. Lot 14, the cabin. She said it was for the neighborhood, a retreat for retired residents. He gave a faint smile. Then she finished it after all. The agents gathered the files, carefully stacking them into their case. Before leaving, Phillips turned to me. You did the right thing, Mr. Carter. You helped close a very strange chapter. Strange, I echoed. That's one word for it. After they left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the fading embers in my fireplace. Outside, the lake was perfectly still. Later that evening, I walked back to Lot 14 one last time. The wind had picked up, carrying that faint scent of cedar again. Inside the cabin, the sunlight spilled through unfinished beams. Everything looked the same except one thing. There was a small wooden box on the windowsill, one I hadn't seen before. My name was carved on top. Inside was a folded note, and something wrapped in cloth. The note read, "Marked. If you're reading this, I didn't make it, but don't let this place die with me. You were right, control can destroy as much as it protects. Build this cabin the way it was meant to be, open, shared, and real." I never stole warmth, I was trying to give it back. Keep it burning. Okay. I unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a matchbox, the same kind she used to light her fires, worn and soot-stained. For a long time, I just stood there staring at it. Then I walked outside, crouched by the old fire pit, and struck one match. The flame caught on the edge of a log, real wood, not hollow. The light flickered, alive again. The smoke rose quietly into the night, curling up toward the stars. Somewhere I hoped she could see it. And for the first time in years, the fire didn't feel like anger. It felt like forgiveness. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.